also a time we call Pinkster, which was an African-American celebration that dates all the way back to when New York was New Amsterdam and was Dutch. We do this tour because a lot of what happened in the past has been forgotten, and we want people to remember. What happens is New York City dates all the way back to slavery days. And what happens in school, we learn about slavery in the South, but we never learn that there was slavery in New York. And then enslaved Africans built the infrastructure of the city. Does anybody know what infrastructure means? The roads, the buildings, the harbor. At the time of the American Revolution, there was actually a wall over here. And that separated the city from the countryside. African Americans could not be buried in the city. They buried them on the other side of the wall. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to see the slave burial ground. Some of you don't know, but I am also the famous rapper. And they call me Reese's Pieces. They call me Reese's Pieces because I'm better than Eminem.
Oh my God.
Can you rap for us?
Of course! Now, I have to confess, I'm bad. I'm not bad, I'm just bad. But I'm going to give it my best shot. Yes, sir.
Can you rap for us?
Of course!
Please.
But first I have to fix my hat. So this is the New York City slavery rap. Time to tell the truth. Local history. New York was the land of slavery. Wall Street market. People were sold. Naked bodies left out in the cold. Thousands buried here, never got home. Bodies left without a stone. We built the churches. We paved the roads. Forced to carry the heaviest loads. At South Street Seaport, slave deals were made. Many Africans brought to their grave. New York, the city, wasn't so free. Banks and merchants supported slavery. So New York City wasn't free. Abolition and complicity. Free or slave, cannot hide. History says it was genocide. Thank you, Father.
Can you go to Paris with you too? That was fantastic.
Now, in 1741, we are now outside the wall of New York City. This is a British colonial city. Population of the city is about 5,000 people. It's like a big high school in New York. And about 20% of those 5,000 people were enslaved Africans. And they were not happy. They didn't want to be enslaved, they wanted to be free. Now, it was a funny city. And that is, this is not like a plantation. Most of the enslaved Africans, they worked on the docks, they built the buildings. So they had freedom of movement. But the wages went to the owners, not to them. 1741 was the worst winter in the history of the city up until then. It was so bad that the rivers froze. They never freeze anymore. All the buildings are wood. And what happens is there are fires all over the place. Why? Because people are burning wood to stay warm. But the owners, they think the fires were being started by the enslaved Africans as a rebellion. And what they did is they had a witch trial. They arrested 180 of the 1,000 enslaved Africans, and they accused them of starting the fires. There was no evidence. But what happened was they threatened people, and they said, if you testify and name names, we will send you to Barbados to the sugar plantations. But if you don't testify, we will hang you or burn you alive over here. There are actually drawings of what took place. The white families came to watch. One of the men accused of being the ringleaders refused to testify. He said, I didn't do this. They dragged him here to burn him alive. He said, okay, I'll confess. And they killed him anyway. The murders took place right here, and it's been erased from history. And we want it put back. To understand that slavery was terrorism, people need to know the truth about the past. What happened is Africans prayed in the churches, but they were not allowed to be buried in church grounds because of racism. So they were buried outside the wall here in what was a swamp. They estimate there may have been 5,000 people buried here. Because it was swamp, they just buried people on top of each other as they sunk into the mud. In 1991, the federal government started to build this building. This was going to be part of it, but when they dug it up, they found the burial ground. And what happened is people from the community said, you just can't build a building. This is a sacred place. The governor of New York compared it to Ellis Island. He said, this is our Ellis Island. This is the origin of Africans in New York. The government decided to build the building half plot, and the rest is now a national monument. 500 bodies were dug up, and those bodies are now reburied over here. What happened was in these 5 mounds, they reburied the people. They couldn't bury them separately because the bones were all mixed together.
So you said that in 1991?
1991, they found it.
So we're under it?
It's right, the burial ground is under us. But the bodies were reburied in these mounds.
Do you know anybody
Wait, I can't hear her.
Do you know anybody that's like dead there?
These people died over 200 years ago. Yes, those bodies died before 1790. So we're looking at 210, 230 years ago.
BC? BCE?
No, AD. 230 years ago. These people died at the time of the American Revolution. So, but they were found 30 years ago. And they were reburied. Now the monument is downstairs. We're going to walk through the monument so that you can see it. Now, these 2 students, what's your name? Hey, come over here. What's your name? Sanisha? So Angel Sanisha are going to lead us in a song about the desire to be free. There was a man named John Newton, and John Newton was a slave trader. Very bad. He was on a ship in the Atlantic Ocean, and a hurricane hit, and he thought he was going to die.
I don't know where to stand.
So he promised God. He said, if you let me live, I will fight to end the slave trade. He ended up living, and now he promised God he was going to fight against the slave trade.
Thank you.
And he, in England, he was one of the leaders of the campaign to end the transatlantic slave trade. He wrote a song about his experience called Amazing Grace. So Amazing Grace was a song about ending the slave trade. Because Amazing Grace, the light of the sun the next morning, how sweet it is. It saved a wretch like me. He was a wretch. He was a slave trader. He was lost, but now he's found. He was blind, but now he sees. And he goes on to help end it. Are you ready? You start. One of you start. I can carry two.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah. They do.
How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Was grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears released. How precious is grace appeared the hour I first believed. Excellent. Good job. Okay, we're going to be talking about City Hall, even though you guys passed it already. New York is known to be a sanctuary, land of opportunity and equality for all. Looking more closely into City Hall is a symbol for self-government, maturity, and freedom. However, during the times of slavery, many northern businessmen and merchants like New York profited off of slavery in Cuba and South America.
One of our mayors, William Havemeyer, who was in office during 1845, 1848, and 1872, was a thriving entrepreneur whose monies came from his sugar refining business, specifically refined sugar that came from sugar cane from South America and Central America, harvested by slaves. Havemeyer's sugar refining factories later became known as the American Sugar Company and Domino Sugar. The sugar that provided the initial profit was imported from South America, the Caribbean, and specifically Cuba. In fact, in 1860, Havemeyer produced over a quarter of the world's sugar supply, sugar produced from slave labor.
New York City's economic ties with slavery in South America came from Fernando Wood. As a congressman in the 1840s, Wood was a strong supporter of slavery in the South, and he continued his support when he became mayor of New York City in the 1850s. On January 8, 1861, the New York Times... Oh my God!
It's a bug.
The New York Times published a transcript of Mayor Wood's annual report of the city's Common Council. In this message, Wood spoke about the city's options as the United States Federal Union appeared to be dissolving due to the outbreak of the Civil War. He called on the city to declare its own independence to better facilitate continued trade with the slavery in the South.
Wood's sentiments were supported by the New York Herald and Journal of Commerce. The Herald published a statement by department store magnate Alexander Stewart changing that the refusal of Washington to concede cost us millions daily. The Journal of Commerce warned President-elect Lincoln that there are 1.5 million mouths to be fed daily in the city and its dependencies, and they will not consent to be starved by any man's policy. Towards the end of the war, Wood returned to Congress where he continued to champion the Southern cause and opposed the anti-slavery amendment, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, as a violation of private property rights.
This church, let's see. This church was built by enslaved Africans. It was built in 1766. It's the oldest church in New York City. It after the American Revolution, when the government was first set up, George Washington used to come here on Sundays for his prayers. It's a very historic church. It has a cemetery here, which is just the next one further up. But Africans could not be buried here. They had to be buried outside the wall.
Oh, you're coming?
We're now going to move down to the next church, Trinity. That building was built after Freedom Days, but the original church was also built slavery, and there's a very special burial over there, which everybody will get a kick out of.
New York had the largest slave market in the North. So originally, New York City was a Dutch colony founded in the early 1600s, and the Dutch started bringing the first slaves around 1626. And then eventually when the British took over, New York City, they started the British colonies, they started the slave market down there in the year 1711. The slave market lasted until 1762. So here's some facts about it. So a lot of people like to cover up the fact that slaves have been a big part in transforming New York to the global city that it is, to one of the richest cities in the world that it is. Slaves that helped build the roads, they helped build buildings, they helped the city basically build up its infrastructure from a small swampy island in Manhattan. And so in 1827, New York State finally outlawed slavery. However, the last enslaved person was freed in 1842. Even though this was long after the slave market closed down, the legacy of slavery and the slave market is still very strongly a part of New York City's culture. Who knows about Citibank? Who knows about Domino's Sugar? Do you guys also know about Tiffany & Co., the jewelry company? Well, you know what ties all these companies? Oh, the other fact that I wanted to tell you before I jump into that is at one point, 1 in 5 New Yorkers was actually an enslaved person, and nearly half of all Manhattan households had at least one slave. Okay, so now let's jump into the companies. So you guys know about these companies, right? Now what if I told you that all of these companies helped enable the slave trade in New York?
For you or?
So Citibank, so let's see. I'll start off with Domino's Sugar. So we all know Domino's Sugar, nice and friendly, right? They make sugar, the good stuff. However, Domino's Sugar actually helped finance part of the slave market. They also helped finance for the sugar plantations in Cuba. And Domino's also invested heavily into the slave trade of New York City. And then the other bank that I was talking about, Citibank, they actually helped pay for the transatlantic slave trade. They actually helped pay for slaves to be transported here against their will and to be sold as commodity. And then also, the other thing that I want to talk to you about is, even though the anti-slavery movement was actually founded in New York City, the legacy of slavery is still strong, and a lot of people don't want to admit that. New York at one point was, after Charleston, South Carolina, actually had the most slaves out of any American city in the 1800s. This city is built on the back of slavery. Thank you.
It looks really good. One more. Oh, these are so good.
Great.
Sojourner.